I like the TARDIS here.
We got wibbly wobbly time. Just move to one side there.
Oh, you've got like a have you got a you've got all different clocks that are
We've got 3 clocks all saying different things.
I love it.
I don't know what time it is all day long. It's been a real nuisance.
I know, we keep spinning around looking at the
you set them up and now you don't know what time it is.
Now we're like, oh.
It's highly appropriate. Like, you can be a bit
totally
orientated.
I tell you what else is really appropriate. At the spin, one of the young poets did this extraordinary surreal poem with all these Alice in Wonderland images in it. I said, oh, you're going to have to watch the replay of the story time.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, that's good. We're looking pretty wibbly wobbly. So our apart from Alice in Wonderland and possible slight spooky things, the whole Alice in Wonderland thing came up as a subject because I think Mum looked it up last time for surreal costume ideas and discovered there is a thing called Alice in Wonderland Syndrome, where people, a bit like Alice, perceive themselves to get much smaller and larger, or parts of them to do so, and time to pass in a bit of a wibbly wobbly way. So we have a character with that. And I've been reading all about it, which is very interesting and quite limited literature, I get the impression. Other topics where we just have an ESL character, someone with English as their second language. Some bad puns, which is an interesting combination. The zoo and what you shouldn't do at the zoo but do. Unexpected household objects in urban or natural environments, so inside out, as it were, which I've put mostly in the poem, but there is some little bits in the story, and family traditions that you can't live up to. So this little poem is called Inside Out. How it comes to be so, perhaps we'll never know, for many things are found outside that started out at home. Digging in a flower bed, it's rare to find just bulbs. Pegs and cups and spoons and rings will often also seem to grow. Sprouting from the earth you dig, or sitting at the station, hanging out on power lines like they've gone on vacation. Shoes and socks and bits of rags, a thimble or a pen. Once the inside heads on out, it never seems to come back in.
Nice.
We're still finding things that you left in the garden when you were a child.
Sometimes they get out not so accidentally. The story is called Ada in Wombatland. As Ada's plane came through the clouds, revealing the bright turquoise of the ocean and the edge of the city on the sand, the lights in the cabin were raised suddenly, like a dawn that arrived all at once. Ada opened her eyes and blinked at the camera view seat back screen in front of her, then raised the window blind to peer out over the wing of the aircraft at the same view. Except it wasn't the same view. Ada watched as below the glistening surface of the water, a dolphin beat its leathery tail and propelled itself to rejoin its pod, the petal-like corrugations in its fins looming large before her. She turned toward the shoreline, and the city's skyline towered up above her, disappearing into the clouds and making her feel that she would fall backwards if she tried to see where the scrapers met the sky. Ada pulled the blind back down, and as though she'd flicked a switch, she expanded from the window seat, stooping to fit below the thrumming roof of the cabin, watching the tiny passengers slowly waking and shifting in their seats like ants emerging into the early morning sunshine. She could see the tiny staff member who, far below at the end of the aisle, was beginning to collect headsets like Lego hats from each row. Sighing, Ada closed her eyes, leaned back to feel her seat pressing against her Stranger Things t-shirt, and with practiced care, reached out a hand without looking to find the water bottle she knew was actually lodged a few feet in front of her in the seat pocket. She unscrewed the lid, took a sip, and waited. After several moments, she opened her eyes and handed her headset to the air host as they passed her row. Danke? Thank you, she told them. Damn, her English was going to be rusty too. She gave her brain a stern inner stare. Now was not the time to start getting bigger and smaller and having hours pass like seconds. Although time seeming to pass quickly might have been nice during the almost 24 hours of flying. The last time these strange changes to perception had plagued her, she'd been 21 and in the middle of introducing Nita to the nightlife of Berlin. When Ada had announced that she couldn't drink the shots they'd just ordered because her hands appeared far too large and she'd certainly knock them over, Nita had just smiled and given them away to a group of backpackers from Japan. It had, Ada remembered, rather complicated matters that the other tourists did not know the English term shot for a small glass of liquor and had been rather horrified at Nita's offer. Presumably, it sounded to them as if she was offering violence. Before that, Ada had been 8 years old when these disconcerting experiences had become, for a while, a regular part of her life. It didn't help that she'd recently been read Alice in Wonderland at school, and so all her teachers and peers assumed that she was play acting being Alice from the story. When she continued to report being too small to sit in the kitchen chairs one moment and too large to fit through the door later the same afternoon, Ada's aunt took her to a doctor who had never heard of Alice in Wonderland Syndrome and referred her to a psychiatrist who thankfully had encountered the phenomenon before. After a bit of prodding and scanning, the doctors all assured Ada and her family that there was nothing dangerous about the distortions she experienced, as long as she didn't try to operate machinery or cross the road in the middle of one. But they also couldn't be prevented. With little choice, 8-year-old Ada had decided to embrace these alternative ways of seeing the world as a superpower. Sometimes, like today with her view of the dolphins, it could seem a little bit like one, with dazzling close-up views of things other people didn't even notice, or zoomed out perspectives on spaces that were a great help in childhood games of hide and seek. She'll probably grow out of it, the specialist said, talking to the grown-ups only. At 21, Ada had been less appreciative of the syndrome's return. It was difficult to party when your perspective of the city, clubs, and people's houses in relation to yourself could change at any moment. It was hard to pay attention at university when lectures could seem to pass by in seconds, or one's feet were suddenly large enough to crush the professor like an ant. Ich werde sie fallen lassen, she told Nita, horrified, when asked if she would be godparent to Nita's daughter, Florrie. The child should not the fairy giant changeling for her care have. But soon their year's studies finished, and so too, it seemed, was the resurgence of Ada's Alice in Wonderland syndrome, and life moved on. The memory competitions had just been a bit of fun at first, something Nita could do with Ada when clubbing wasn't on the menu. Ada's uncle had been national champion once, and her grandmother had been involved in their local competitions when she was in high school. Ada figured it would be interesting to follow in their footsteps, and she already knew how to create a memory palace anyway. It surprised her when Nita turned out to be enthusiastically dedicated to the idea. She hadn't meant for it to be a long-term hobby. Somehow, though, she found herself at the national championship with Nita, and later, when Nita returned to Australia, coaching her via Zoom calls and promising to meet up at open competitions around the world. So here Ada was, years later, on the plane to visit her goddaughter Florrie and carry on a family tradition by attending the World Memory Championship for the first time. Florrie, now, thankfully, was an adult and at no great risk of being dropped or particularly impeded in any way by her godmother's thinking she had shrunk or grown or lost a day to time running faster than usual. Still, it bothered Ada greatly that her Alice in Wonderland experiences should have chosen now to return. Florrie had never been with Ada when this happened before, as her mother had, and Ada was not especially keen to tell her about it. So far, Ada felt that she'd been an acceptably grown-up, reliable adult for Florrie. She imagined that Florrie's perception of her might change if she started behaving like someone who had consumed a dubiously edible mushroom. With any luck, the episode on the plane would be a one-off, and the visit would be uneventful, with the exception of dramatic memory championship success and outstanding support of her godchild from here on. Ada was prevented from any further ruminations by the staticky crackle of the announcement speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall shortly be arriving into Melbourne Airport. Please fasten your seatbelts and ensure the tray table is folded away. The announcement carried on a while, with instructions about keeping your carry-on luggage out of the way and so forth, which Ada had heard so many times before as to be irritated by them. Please be aware that daylight savings has started overnight and clocks have been put forward by an hour. The local time is therefore now 11:35 a.m. It's a balmy 26 degrees on the ground this evening and, of course, raining. Ada frowned. She hoped Florrie had remembered to reset the clocks. To Ada's relief, she could see Florrie's curls in the waiting crowd as she made her way up the international arrivals ramp. Florrie looked like she did on Zoom, except more grown up than ever, with one of those official-looking lanyards still around her neck from working a morning broadcast, and a navy blouse tucked into business trousers. With her were a young woman in black, floaty chiffon jumpsuit, who Ada recognized as Pandora, her housemate, and another young person who Ada assumed must be Florrie's mysterious new date, Nat. Nat looked very at odds with Florrie's newsreader office wear. He had a very casual tracksuit outfit and orange ends on his hair. Ada eyed him warily as she approached. Florrie spotted her. Tante! She wriggled between a man with a sign for a business visitor and an inexplicable dropped beach ball that everyone was tripping over, and came to hug Ada, grabbing her suitcase from her hand and wheeling it in the direction of her two young companions. You probably recognize Pan from our video calls. Pan waved her ring-colored fingers in a kind of Mexican wave motion, where each finger lifted separately. Ada carefully avoided comparing the fingers to people at sports games, lest her eyes decide to make them a similar size. And this is Nat. Nat stepped forward and shook hands. He had a ring on his thumb and a child's sippy cup drink bottle hanging from his wrist on a cord. Hello, V. Gates, he smiled. Then he grimaced. Don't answer me in German. Those are literally the only words I know. You'll have to forgive us all being a bit tired, Florrie told Ada, before she could attempt to answer Nat in English. We just lost an hour with the clocks changing. Ada nodded, trying to look suitably sympathetic without giving away how familiar she was with the phenomenon. Well, no time like the present, Nat grinned, turning towards the exit. Florrie rolled her eyes, leading the way to the car park lifts. Nat likes to make puns, Tante. If you don't understand him, don't worry. It's probably just something everyone else is groaning over anyway. They all squeezed into the car, Ada feeling glad that she perceived herself to fit, and Pan and Nat got in the back and let her sit in the front with Florrie. Any good movies on the flight, Aunt Ada? Florrie inquired, pulling up to the ticket machine. Ada scrunched up her face. I saw the one, The Life of P. I wasn't sure what to think of it. Florrie smiled out at the road and there was a giggle from Pan in the back. The Life of Pi, Tante, Florrie corrected. P is like we. Wann man die Toilette benutzen? Oh, I see. Ada chuckled, then frowned. But you say P in the alphabet, yes? Florrie nodded and grinned. Yeah, the letter is also P. That's English for you. They arrived very quickly at the house that Florrie shared with Pan, or at least Ada thought that they did and hoped that this wasn't just her. Pan had moved her things temporarily into Florrie's room so that Ada could have her room, an arrangement which Ada could not imagine lasting, considering how many shawls Pan had put over all Florrie's doorknobs, doors, lamps, and floor. Nat got out a cheese platter from the fridge. Got some blue cheese, he said. Not sure what it's so down about. Florrie put the kettle on. Ignore him. The more you take notice, the more puns he'll do. Ada watched them moving easily about one another in the kitchen and smiled bemusedly. No, explain the pun. It's good for my English to learn. Nat put down some Doritos. Well, it's a bit corny, he replied. But blue can also mean sad, you see. You did another one, Ada observed, taking a chip. These are made of corn, yes? Nat gave her 2 thumbs up. Very good. Pan emerged from Florrie's room then, presumably having just put more of her stuff in there, and got in between Florrie and Nat at the counter to make herself a different kind of tea in her own tea-for-one style teapot. She pulled a large wooden box from the top of the cupboard and opened it, letting out a puff of air scented with spices and herbs and the unmistakable earthiness of loose tea leaves. You must like tea a lot, Ada observed. Oh, yes, Pan agreed. It's always tea time here, of course. The way she said it made Ada feel a strange sense of familiarity. Was that a line from Alice in Wonderland, she asked, wondering for one strange moment whether Florrie somehow knew all about Alice in Wonderland Syndrome already and had told her friend. Florrie brought a different sharing-sized teapot to the table. Don't get her started, she grimaced. She's obsessed with Alice in Wonderland lately. Pan loves anything that's a bit surreal. Ada eyed Pan as she sat down with her smaller teapot, making a mental note to be extra careful what she mentioned in front of her. So you're competing in the World Memory Championships, Nat inquired, sitting down and pouring the tea. What sort of things do you have to remember? Ada took some cheese and ate it on a Dorito, nodding her head. When she'd finished her mouthful, she replied, well, there are 10 categories. One is remembering names to go with faces. There are binary numbers and regular long numbers, tests with playing cards, dates and events, and the order for abstract images. She paused. Florrie, I sent you an email and annexed an example binary number test so you can help me. She watched Florrie smile as she sipped her tea. And I can teach you how to do it if you want to carry on the legacy. Florrie inhaled some of her tea and began coughing violently. When she recovered, she said, attached, Tante, you mean attach a document. Annex is usually for things like buildings or land. Why? Asked Ada. I don't know, sighed Florrie. Because English? Because English steal words from other languages, then use them different ways and say to the original language, you are wrong now. That is why, Ada grumped. Nat sliced a butter knife through the blue cheese. This might seem cheesy, but there's no need to be blue about it, he said.
Oh.
Florrie and Ada both rolled their eyes this time. Pan seemed to be very, very focused on the dregs of her tea and ignored him. But how on earth do you remember all those huge lists of things, he asked, as though carrying on the same sentence. Ada took a sip of tea. Well, you first establish a route around a place you know, so you can repeat moving around the space in your mind, she began. Florrie swallowed the tea in her cup and watched it instead of Ada. Then, when you have the things to memorize, you imagine placing them in order of landmarks around the route. To recall them, retrace your steps, find the cards or numbers at the landmarks. Nat nodded slowly. Ah. Yeah, now that you say it, I've heard about people doing it. Might be difficult if Florrie went for the cheese and knocked her cup of tea onto Nat's lap. Ow, Nat complained, leaping up to dab down his tracksuit bottoms. No need for hostility, Florrie. That was a bit brutal. Florrie grabbed some paper towel and wiped the table and floor. He's fine, she told Ada. So long as he's making puns, there's nothing to worry about. Ada had some more cheese. Is there anywhere here that might be an interesting space for me to use for memorizing? I've run out of rooms in my apartment, and I went to a castle this year, but I've used it too many times. Sometimes it's difficult to clear the old memories out. Nat sat back down and answered around a large piece of camembert. What about the zoo? Zug? Train? Ada frowned. Zoo. Tiergarten. Florrie supplied. Nat has a daughter, Jenny, who always wants to be at the zoo. We could all go tomorrow if you aren't too jet lagged. She poured Nat some fresh tea. It's quite big, and the different areas and animal enclosures would make good landmarks, wouldn't they? Ada woke up while it was still dark and decided to get out of bed, knowing she wouldn't be able to go back to sleep with her body clock being back to front. She slid her feet towards the floor, down and down. Oh no, she was small again. Really, brain, now? Ada took a deep breath. I'm not really tiny, she reminded herself. I'm probably just moving my feet very slowly. If I'm going to come across as a sensible, hopeful adult, I will have to behave as though I don't look tiny to myself. So, on the count of 3, I'll jump down from the bed. 1, 2, 3. She launched herself for the floor with far more force than necessary and landed with a loud thump. Ada looked around like a thief who has triggered the alarm, but there were no sounds of anyone else waking up. She carefully made her way to the door, where she steeled herself to feel for the handle she knew must be in front of her, but which appeared, from her current point of view, like Alice's key on the glass table, completely out of reach. As she was looking at the decorative edge of the frame, however, Ada spotted, to her alarm, a large spider, hanging in its web and looking at this moment as if it were the size of her head. She reminded herself that it was certainly not, in reality, a large spider at all, but it was with some trepidation that she reached in front of her, seeking the door handle. She would have to mention the spider to Florrie later and ask for something to catch it in. Emerging at last into the hallway, Ada found to her relief that she seemed to be once again in the correct proportions. It occurred to her that it would be nice to make breakfast for Florrie and Pan, but as she neither knew what Pan ate, Pan looked like a person with special dietary requirements to Ada for some reason, nor particularly enjoyed cooking. She thought it best to fall back on going for an early morning shop to get some pastries. This proved easier said than done. Ada couldn't remember if there was an all-encompassing term for pastries in English. The actual bakeries weren't open yet, and the people in the supermarket, for some reason, backed away when she said "gebak" to them, rather than attempting to translate. Eventually, she found what she considered to be extremely poor examples of cinnamon rolls and croissants, and ferried a collection of these back to Florrie's house. As she walked back up Florrie's street, Ada noticed something odd. In various places along the road, such as by the post box, under street signs, and next to bins, there were varying numbers of spoons stuck into the ground with the end downwards, as though the dirt was a tasty dessert. That's very curious, Ada muttered, borrowing the English term she'd seen on Alice in Wonderland themed items in Pan's room. I wonder if it's my silly eyes or someone else's odd game. She pushed further thought about it aside and went in to brew some coffee and set the pastries on the table. Pan emerged from Florrie's room after what the clock in the kitchen told Ada was another 30 minutes, rubbing her eyes and wearing a satin dressing gown that was just as black and floaty as her shawls. "What time is it?" she grumbled, going to the kettle and getting out her special personal teapot again. 9 o'clock, answered Ada, looking at the clock. "Yeah, but it isn't really, is it?" Pan replied, leaning impatiently on the counter with the teapot open. Ada frowned. "Did you change the clocks yesterday?" "Yeah," said Pan. "But if it was yesterday, it would only be 8. So of course we're still tired." Ada set down her coffee impatiently and fixed Pan with a stern look. "Yes, but it is not yesterday, so there is no point bumping in the bush pretending it is early." Huh? Pan poured water in her teapot, frowning. Ada didn't get a chance to check her idiom, however, because at that moment the front door crashed open and a small girl slipped in, followed by a tired-looking Nat. "Foo!" giggled the child. "I'm practicing being scary for Halloween." She looked at Pan. "Are you dressed as a witch, Pan?" Pan shook her head, seeming not to understand where the child had got this impression. The girl turned to Ada. "I'm Jenny. Who are you? Where's Florrie? Can I have this?" She grabbed at a cinnamon roll. Ada laughed. "Hello, I'm Florrie's Aunt Ada. I'm her godmother." Jenny went right up to Ada and looked at her closely. "Are you a fairy then?" She walked all the way around Ada's chair. "You're big for a fairy." Ada did her wisest nod. "I see, yes, a fairy godmother, like the fairy tales. Well," she decided it wouldn't hurt to give the child a version of the truth. Everyone else would just assume she was playing along. "Sometimes I'm very small, just not right now. Fairies are magic, so I can change in size." Nat and Jenny had season tickets for the zoo, so they didn't have to stand in line for the regular daily places. Jenny seemed to have decided that Ada was with her for the day and towed her immediately off to see a particular duck, which she insisted was always on a rock outside the seal enclosure and was her friend. "I'm not sure why we come to the zoo to see ducks," Nat muttered ruefully. "Hey, Jenny, Ada actually has a job to do while she's here, so we have to let her go around the whole zoo, okay? Not just stay at the seals." "Okay," Jenny replied in her best disgruntled voice, while Florrie tried to make sense of the zoo map. "I can't work out where we are," she complained, turning the map upside down and putting her head on the side. "See if there's a duck pond marked," replied Nat. "That might help to crack the case." Whilst Florrie and Nat were looking at the map, hoping to pick out a helpful route around the zoo for Ada, Jenny had finished giving her duck friend a substantial portion of the petting zoo feed and started pulling Ada away down the path that ran straight ahead. "This way," she said firmly. "This way is giraffes, and it's feeding time at 10, and they always lick someone, and the person always screams because people are weird." They set off, passing a wide open grass area on the way, where 2 macaws were flying from one keeper to another. "Shut up, Charlie, shut up," one of the macaws was saying. A small boy in the crowd, pressed in around the grass, was looking rather shocked at the bird. "Please excuse Charlie," one of the keepers told the audience. "He's very loud at night, and it seems our security staff sometimes told him to shut up. I promise he isn't talking to any of you out there, if anyone here happens to be named Charlie too." The small boy in the crowd burst into tears and ran back to a woman sitting on a nearby wooden railing. "I don't want to have the same name as a bird," he was wailing. Jenny looked back at Ada as they passed this scene. "See, people are very silly." "What's your favourite animal here, Jenny?" Ada asked, as Florrie and Nat hurried to catch up. Jenny considered. I like leopards. They try to hide, but I always find them. Dad says it's because they can't help being spotted.
Oh.
And I like the wombats. You aren't supposed to pat the wombats, but sometimes, if it's very quiet, you can sneakily do it. Jenny, said Nat in a warning voice. Are there any ice bars here? Ada wanted to know. Like ice blocks, Jenny replied, frowning. There's a cafe where we get chips. I think they have some. In the cafe? Ada asked, alarmed. I think Aunt Ada means ice bears, Florrie interjected. In German, you say bar, like "arr." She bared her teeth. Bar, mimicked Jenny, delighted. Oh, ice bears, polar bears. She bounced. I like those. They look so cuddly. But sometimes if a little kid is sitting near the glass, they jump in the water like if they were catching a seal. And that's probably because they think the kid is about the same size as a baby seal. So it wouldn't be a good idea to actually go near one. By the chimpanzee enclosure, a keeper with a guitar was sitting on a rock and playing classical tunes. We're trying some new enrichment activities, another keeper was explaining. Some of the animals seem to quite enjoy music, so we're playing them a few different kinds to see what they like to listen to. As she was speaking, one of the chimps approached the glass window and stopped, watching the musician. The humans watched the chimp, all looking tense and hopeful, expecting perhaps that their fellow primate might bob or sway in time or otherwise show appreciation. Presently, the chimpanzee pressed its hands to the glass, and everyone waited with bated breath until the primate's hands came away, leaving smears of brown poo all over the section of glass nearest to the guitar player. The musician stopped playing, shaking his head. Well, I think it's pretty clear what he thinks of me, don't you? He asked the astounded crowd. As they approached the nocturnal house, Ada and Jenny drew ahead of Nat and Florrie again. Florrie having just been thoroughly spat on by an alpaca who was unimpressed with the feed on offer. Come this side, Jenny whispered, tugging Ada's sleeve. No one ever sits here, and they don't notice if you have your arm over the rail because it's dark. Ada followed the child into the red-lit gloom, where rustlings suggested more shapes in the dark than could be seen digging in the sand and spinifex, and cricket sounds were being played over a speaker. The red light felt thicker to Ada than sunlight, and the space much larger than it must have been to fit within the small shed-like building they'd entered. Jenny led the way past a few other whispering groups of people to a low bench in the corner, right by the fence that surrounded the visible parts of the enclosure. Shh! Jenny put her finger dramatically to her lips and settled in to wait, watching the clump of grasses and logs in the corner of the enclosure intently. Sometimes the wombats come in here, she stage whispered, but you have to be very quiet and sit very still. Sure enough, presently there was a faint rustling in the gloom, and a squat, waddling creature came barreling at an impressive speed for its shape along the edge of the enclosure, drawing to a stop right below where they sat, and beginning to drag and tear at the tough-looking grass that poked out of the red sand with what must have been very strong teeth. Jenny, whispered Ada, I don't think it's a good idea to... Shh, hissed Jenny, and moments later she slipped an arm over the rail and carefully stroked the animal between the ears. Hey, breathed Ada, trying to catch the child by the elbow. But that was the moment when Ada felt herself get small, and suddenly she was tumbling into the enclosure, the railings looming like mountains as she turned and flipped, down, down through the air, until, thump, she found herself in the sand between the wombat's feet. The animal eclipsed most of the dim red light from this angle, and Ada could only see the shift of the sturdy silhouette as the wombat chewed its mouthful of grass. Oh dear, what a curious situation, Ada muttered, half amused at how Alice in Wonderland-like her situation was, half anxious as to how she was going to get up and leave without causing a scene or being bitten by a wombat. She decided that trusting the child with her secret was the best option. "Jenny," she whispered, trying to remember that she probably was still sitting right next to Jenny, despite the fact that all she could see of her now were her bright orange boots, which seemed to glow in the dark. "You know how I said I sometimes get small?" "Yeah," hissed Jenny. "Well, I know it probably doesn't look like it, but will you believe me if I say that I'm small now?" Jenny sighed, and her breath made a big gusty wave that buffeted Ada where she sat on what looked like sand dunes. "Well, it looks like you fell in with the wombat, and you're sitting in there with it. I'd get in too, but I think we'll get into trouble. So, okay." Ada looked up in the direction she knew Jenny to be. "Well, to you, I look big, but to me, I look very small. And because I look small, the fence is very high and I am sticking here," she whispered back. "If I put up my hand, can you grab it and pull me up?" Jenny sighed again. "Okay, but you owe me ice cream because the wombat is probably going to run away." She tugged up on Ada's arm, and sure enough, the wombat suddenly trundled off, stepping on Ada's toes, which were all of a sudden normal size. And Ada climbed out of the nocturnal house animal enclosure and hurried for the door with Jenny in tow, just as Florrie and Nat went to come inside. "Oh," exclaimed Nat, stepping back. "Coming out already?" "We had an adventure," announced Jenny. "Ada got small and fell in with the wombat." "What do you mean she got small?" Florrie demanded. Ada avoided her eyes. "But you only just went in," Nat objected. "Surely nothing really happened in those few seconds." Jenny grabbed Ada again and headed out the door. "Come on, we can explain after. I rescued Ada, and now she owes me ice cream." At the cafe, Jenny sat down at a table with Nat, and they tried not to laugh as a woman put her head next to an alpaca for a selfie and it bit her ear. Florrie and Ada went in to select ice cream. "Florrie has to get the scoop as usual," Nat said. "Shall we sit by this small animal enclosure and act like nuts so the squirrels like us?" Jenny nodded enthusiastically. "I think Ada is a bit of a mystery," she announced as she sat down. "Better go and see the alligator then," Nat told her. Jenny made a face. "Why?" "So we can get them to put on a vest and be an investigator."
Oh dear.
Jenny giggled. Florrie and Ada returned with ice cream for all, and there was a quiet moment or two while everyone was making sure the edges of their cones were eaten enough not to drip. "So, Aunt Ada," Florrie began sternly once ice creams were attended to, "what's all this about falling into wombat enclosures?" Ada sighed. "Okay," she admitted. "There's something I've not told you about. I do not want you to think that I'm not somebody you can build on. But when I was little, I would have the trouble that's called Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. It makes you see strangely. I've not had this in a long time, but sometimes it comes back, and at the moment it seems to bother me again." "Oh, I think I remember," said Florrie. "You do not remember," Ada replied pragmatically. "You were not born the last time." "Daddy said you were going to do a competition to remember loads of things," Jenny interrupted. "Will you be able to do it if you get small?" Ada nodded seriously. "Oh, yes, I've been small at exams before, and a giant also. But I remember that even though my eyes see I'm really small, really I'm not. So I just have to act as though I'm normal size. It is tricky, but not impossible." "So," Florrie tilted her head, "it's like your brain sometimes does something with images you see and makes them look weird, like a bendy mirror. Ada nodded. But you somehow do stuff anyway, like international travel and memory championships. Ada shrugged. Yes, it only happens sometimes. Mostly it happened when I was younger. Florrie twirled her ice cream cone. Yeah, but my point is that actually that makes you more badass, not less. An evil donkey? Ada inquired. Florrie laughed. It means cool, Tante. Florrie's brain does weird things with pictures too, Jenny announced. It does, Ada frowned. I was getting to that, Florrie muttered. I know you'd like to see me do the memory competitions too, but it might not be my thing. I'm not Mum. Florrie can't make pictures in her head, so how would she go around the memory road? Jenny interrupted. Jenny, maybe we should go and visit the otters, Nat offered. But they'll go really slowly and not say everything they want to, Jenny whined. Ada finished her ice cream and smiled at Jenny. That's true. That is what adults do, she chuckled. Then she paused, pensively scrunching her napkin. But you could be wrong about the memory palace, for Florrie. What do you think my way around this zoo is like? Sometimes the pictures are falling down in the night house with the wombat. My brain can see this again, but it's mostly black. I could still put a card or number at the wombat. I would remember it with the falling and the snuffling and even the word wombat. And how a wombat feels to pat, added Jenny enthusiastically. Yes, maybe, replied Ada, ignoring an alarmed glance from Matt. You see, this is more interesting to just rooms with furniture. I'm very hopeful about using the zoo to remember. Ada clasped her hands on the picnic table and watched Florrie. I'd get lost though, Tante, Florrie told her, folding her arms. I'd never be able to go through the zoo the same way twice, even when I'm actually in the zoo. My sense of direction is the worst. I've tried putting spoons in real places like spades so I can remember the feeling of putting them in, but I only retrace my steps the wrong way. Diversed? Ada frowned. No, not sausages. I just mean it's very bad. Well, said Ada, do you care for it? After all, it is nothing but remembering long numbers and packs of cards. It is a very curious pursuit. Florrie shrugged. I suppose not, particularly. And I was running out of dessert spoons, and I had no idea what I'd use for hearts and clubs. But doesn't the whole thing sort of run in your family? She looked over at Ada. And Ada realized then that for all she sometimes felt like a child in a fanciful story, she must have done an acceptably good job of being a grown-up and not dropping anyone where it counted. She searched her mind for an English word she wasn't sure she knew. Some of my relatives did it too, she shrugged. But it is not a before condition. She shook her head. That wasn't the word. You're not a flying mouse, Florrie. It's not necessary to get the hang of sleeping upside down in order to belong among us. Ada made a pun, smiled Nat. Bats are what you mean by flying mice, I think. They certainly have to get the hang of hanging. Ada watched Florrie, who gave a little nod and looked down into her napkin. Well, while I'm at it, Ada said, I was small in the morning, so it could be very tiny. But in Pan's room, I think I saw a big spider. When we get back, we'd better check its website.
Very good.
Well done. You did a great job of the attempts at English from the ESL speaker. Yeah, well done.
Yeah, I looked up some fun examples of people learning English. I felt a lot of them didn't really fit for a German speaker.
No.
Although the first lot I saw were from a German class learning English, but they just didn't really apply in the situation, or weren't quite as sort of funny a mistake. So what I actually did mostly was some of the things I knew how you say them in German, or I looked up how they would say it and just did a literal translation instead of
there's a
you
lot
know,
of
how
that.
we would change that to be English.
Yeah. That was fun.
That rabbit seems to have a lot to say.
I know. Doesn't
I'll put my rabbit somewhere funny.
it's got a lot to say.
Oh, he's in the teacup. That's very Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, he's very Alice in Wonderland. I'll have to show you at the other tea time.
Oh, you got the hedgehog.
He's
Very good.
Wonderland
Very
reference.
good. The croquet bowl. Yeah.
That's perfect. Oh my goodness. There's also rabbits outside now. I just saw 2 rabbits go.
Oh,
Um,
some wild ones.
Yep, very cute.
Are they eating all your herbs?
Well, they only eat my weeds, which
Oh,
is great.
Great.
They're
Okay.
actually very friendly neighbours.
Very cooperative rabbits indeed.
And
Oh.
what has Claire got? That was
It was briefly a flying mouse, but a mouse that I knitted. I was going for silly and surreal, and it was all that I had. So
It's excellent.
It's
You
good.
should have used that for your computer mouse.
Not very cute, but very cute.
Connecting to audio could be a whole new
yes, yeah, with them.
With your real mouse for mouse.
I think the request I want to put in is adapting to change.
Okay.
Like being capable.
Mm.
Oh,
Like capably or like being sufficient, do you know what I mean? Is there a,
sound good.
what was that?
Either of those sound good.
Being sufficient unto the day. That's a
Oh, is that a
phrase.
phrase?
That is
Sufficient unto the day. It means you just you can manage.
Oh, I like
Uh-huh.
I
That's good.
that before.
Before Em goes, I'll just mention the next date is the 13th of November.
Oh, it's the later one, yeah.
All right, that sounds good.
Of October.
Oh, that's great. That's immediately after I've finished uni for the year.
Oh, uni.
Perfect. Yeah. An
So
end
that's
of
good.
uni story. So, any other requests for the next?
Oh, I wouldn't mind Ada coming back.
You liked Ada.
But Ada was a lot of fun.
Okay. Can request a character.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Another one. So is Jenny Jen,
She
or is that just some? Yeah. So I was like, it felt like her, but I wasn't sure if my timelines were wrong. Yeah.
well picked?
Yeah, well done.
Dance group would be good. I've got a couple friends who are pregnant and they're probably going to have the dads be to stay at home. And they're like, everything says mother's group. Why can't it be parents group?
A dad's group.
Yeah.
Like specifically, yeah.
Not all, either a dad's group or they want a non-gender specific parents group.
Yeah,
Okay.
why not a carers group or a parents group? Yeah, that's a funny one, isn't it? So
Mother's
that's
baby.
very persistent. Another thing I'd like to see in the next story is the distraction provided by animals when you're trying to do serious things. Because they can be incredibly distracting. That would have been a big issue with working from home, I reckon.
Yeah.
They've got their dogs, they've got their cats, and how cats have got like a magnetic attraction for keyboards or laptops.
It's what you're focusing on. Then it's like, no, me.
Yeah, that's
Me.
cool.
I'm
Get
here.
away. Yeah, exactly.
You might want to look up mirroring, Sarah,
Yeah.
if you don't know about that already on that exact topic, mirroring in pets.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyone else that might like to Google that? It's funny.
Yeah.
So
As
do
in
that.
the pet
They mimic you or you.
Yeah, they mirror. So that's what
Yeah.
they think. Actually, they've done some studies on cats, and if you give them a fake laptop that's not even necessarily on, if you're on your laptop, they will
You're
be
on
on
the
the
other
fake
one.
laptop.
Oh,
They're actually
my
mirroring.
God,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
So people buy their cats fake laptops so they get off theirs and also.
Does that
I
just
thought
mean
you were
they're
gonna do
really
that.
good at making social connections? Because they're doing the like make your posture look like the other person.
Yeah.
To make
Social
them comfortable.
imitation. Yeah.
That's sort of Claire. That's an alarming prospect if it's like, you know, that old thing of people becoming like their pets or pets becoming like their people. Because, you know, you think about Shamrock when he got old and he would like drool a lot and that sort of thing. I'm
I'm not looking
Oh, you're like,
forward to
oh, we
No,
don't
I'm
want
not
to
looking forward
drool.
to that.
No.
No.
I think that might just be a golden retriever thing. Any
Or
other
maybe you
ones?
should put animals sitting in your story then.
Looking after someone
after
else's pets.
animals.
Mm.
Yeah, because, you know, some people make a living out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got friends who make a living.
But like a professional pet sitter.
Yes.
Yeah.
The other
Well,
thing
they're not really, they don't get enough money to.
Yeah.
To live
No.
on that,
Professional.
got
But
money,
some
but-
people
what
like
happens-
perpetually
you get to
house
stay in
sit
the other
and
house and
pet sit,
stuff.
don't they?
Yeah. I know
They
some people
supplement their income by
Yeah, they do.
pets.
Or like use that as a way of essentially couch
Housing.
surfing, but the
Yeah,
other people
house
don't have to
surfing.
be
There you
home
go.
with them. They're staying at the house looking
Makes
after the
sense.
pet, and then they go to
Mm.
someone else's do the same thing, and they don't have to have their own home.
On that note with pet sitting, my other request could be, could we have something where like, you know, you're told this is something about the animal and they always do this or they never do this, and then they actually do not do what was advertised.
That's
And you're
ticking
kind of like-
space. That's
Yeah.
ticking space, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ticken's got
But
no-
is that interesting thing
no.
about the mirroring? Because is it because they only do that with their people because their people do
Yeah, I
something
actually
that
didn't
like
think of
prompts
that.
that behavior?
Yeah.
Gradually worked up to me. I brushed part of her back, but not allowed to touch her tummy or anything like that, which of course is where she's got the longest fur and gets knots. So I give up, and once a year when she's starting to lose her winter coat, I take her to the vet. And apparently she just sits there, rolls over, lets them do it. It's perfectly fine. I'm just like,
Classic.
Yeah.
That's
Putting
interesting.
brief appearance in
Gosh,
the
this
store.
is going to be
Sit in-
working with animals and children, isn't it?
It is a
Definitely.
bit. Yeah, just a little bit.
But that's good for a story. It's
Yeah,
only
it
in
is.
movies you're not supposed to do that. That's
Oh,
that's
Put it in the box. Yeah,
Oh,
it's in the box.
screenshot needed.
all right. Hold on, put taking full screen.
Oh, definitely put.
Can
So what have you got in your bookshelves, Tegan? Books,
She's
cats,
nice. I
and more
love her
books.
shelf.
You can't
He's
see it very
looking at-
well because she's such a black
He's
cat.
black.
She's like,
The
she's got the
void.
whole "where's the face" thing going on. She's void.
Oh, guys. Oh yeah, she's reaching up. Down come the books.
Okay, that's a fun story. And any further things you think of, you can let me know in one of our chats. And if you think of more,
Have Mark and Margaret got something?
No.
no.
No great ideas at the moment.
All right. Well, if you think of anything, just
Unless,
send a
unless
message
it's
to the story.
unless it's Schrodinger's cat, you know, the one in the box with the cyanide tablet.
Schrodinger's cat.
Schrodinger's
Is
cat.
that-
Yes.
Which is both alive and dead.
There might be a way I can squeeze that idea in.
Because there's a cat in a box there.
I mean, I'm not going to have a cat
I can
that
squeeze
might,
it
that
away.
might accidentally get poisoned by cyanide, but I might the concept of Schrodinger's
The concept of Schrodinger's cat. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
cat. We can manage that.
Barry's mother used to have two black china cats. She would have had them in those shelves as well. Oh, it's doing funny things.
Oh, it's very cute. We could
I
all
like
just
your movable
stay
one.
here for a while to watch the cat.
So that's it. That's enough.
Optical illusions. There you go.
Optical
Sarah?
illusions. Okay.
Yeah, because I thought Mark had a cat.
Oh yeah.
I did too.
Actually, that can be very funny. When my mum.
Oh, you see it, now you don't.
So I'm going to put optical illusions concerning animals because when
Hiding
I
behind the
was
plant.
little and we used to drive in the car, Dad and I used to play a very simple game called Spot the Animals. Do you remember this, Dad?
Yeah, I
And but you just had to see animals and point them out, and then whoever saw the most won the game at the end of the drive. but whenever we played Spot the Animals, Dad would be saying like sheep, camel, goat, and it was always like a stump or something that like
Bale of hay.
making an
Yeah.
optical illusion that looked a bit like it might be an animal.
That's before I got my glasses.
It was before I got my glasses.
Yeah, that's true as well.
I could see when I was little. I only developed my short
My,
sight was sort of my
Bale is
puberty.
My mum's eyesight failed as she got older, and she used to have a lot of fun with things that she thought she was seeing and then kind of worked out, oh, no, it wasn't that. I remember one time Jane had given me a woolen scarf. You know, for a while it was very fashionable to have those scarves with all these sort of little dangly bits. So you'd have this like beautiful lacy stuff, you have long lacy bits and whatever. And Janie had given me a woolen scarf with long sort of diamond shaped dangly woolen bits hanging from it. And I used to wear it. It was really nice and warm and everything. You know, I didn't even think about it. It was just like the lace ones I had.
Yeah.
And I wore it up to Mum's one day, and she laughed. She was laughing as I came down. Oh, because she saw it as I'd put tea bags hanging down. So she thought I was making a kind of tea joke, and it was only when I got to about a metre from her, and I said, "What is it?" And she just buckled up and said, "Yeah, I thought you had tea bags."
Enjoy.
Right.
I just want to say before we wrap up ourselves, at some point we just have to have a like tea theme, and it's like as much tea on top of tea as you can do.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
yeah, we can do things like the tea bag shawl and
Oh,
like,
definitely.
Yes. That's a good
teacup
idea.
hats and teacup shaped biscuits and multiple cups and as many pots as you can fit in the
Tea cakes.
Yeah.
We can have tea cakes.
You
You could have matcha flavored ice cream.
yeah
Do you know what,
things
Sarah?
flavored with green tea also.
Mm.
Yes.
The topsy-turvy theme suited Barry very well today because he was allowed to have his dessert before we ate our.
Oh,
Yeah.
back from. I thought you were going to say
Yeah.
but he tumbled down a hill or something. Oh dear.
Yeah. Not the kind of topsy-turvy.
No, that would be good. We do have to have a tea one.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for the good story.